With Madolche once again netting the top spot in my most recent top non-meta or rogue deck countdown, it is an appropriate time for an update on an old deck that was primarily built as a hedge against Domain Monarchs. Note that this deck does not run Brilliant Fusion or any Pendulums. I've said it before. I feel that too many people are running Madolche in a way that kind of pulls away from its strengths by trying to make it a somewhat super fast, strong, first turn quasi OTK deck, significantly dependent on drawing Brilliant Fusion in the opening hand. How I think they should be played is to focus on defense and counterattacking instead of trying to keep pace with the opponent's speed and quasi OTKing or locking them down with an Abyss Dweller and a Cheria Beast first turn field. With that said, let's get started. One of the biggest benefits for Madolche is the expected significant drop in Domain Monarch play, for while I certainly do not think Domain Monarchs are dead, the greater Yu-Gi-Oh community seems to be trending towards a different opinion. This is great news for Madolche, which also results in meaningful changes for the deck in addition to a slightly changing meta now and significant changes after Vengeance. Starting with the subtractions, both Injection Fairy Lilies are now relegated to the side deck for getting rid of that Tribute Summoned Monarch, possibly even supported by a March, which would make Dark Hole and its ilk irrelevant, is no longer high priority. Lily is still an interesting card for this deck, but there are some new options available, and Lily versus multiple Blue Eyes typically does not work out well. Also, the 3 double summons are dropped to clear up deck space. In my opinion, the double summons helped more than they hurt, but there were certainly times when they did hurt. However, there are some more important options that need to be run based on the emergence of different non-monarch threats. The lack of Injection Fairy Lily also limits the usefulness of getting that immediate second summon. With no more double summons, having a Hootcake in hand is of less value, thus Hootcake copies fall from 3 to 2 to free up a deck spot. Keeping it at 3 is fine too, but in my experience that extra main deck spot has more value being something else than a third Hootcake. The 3 Battle Faders leave for other stall options appear to now be in a position of more usefulness than in the past. I dropped the 1 Soul Charge. Now, most might be thinking, of course Soul Charge should not be in this deck, because of its natural return to the deck mechanic. But it was not as inefficient as some might think for getting 1 Queen on the board, especially mid-game. However, now opposing decks have become a little too fast and too stalwart to rely on just 1 Queen from the charge without also getting that ability to attack. Finally, I dropped 1 Vanity's Emptiness and 1 Torrential Tribute for deck space considerations. So, what is added? With another Thunder King now available, running Rai-Oh is definitely interesting. At 1 copy, Thunder King was just too inconsistent. You didn't see it enough. But at 2 copies, the probability of seeing it first turn obviously increases significantly. So I actually run 2 copies of Thunder King Rai-Oh. I find there's little conflict in this deck between Thunder King and Magileine. Finishing the new monster additions, I also now run Terrortop engine to increase Queen summoning probability indirectly via bringing out a Leviair or an Invoker without any real significant negatives. 3 copies of Terrortop, 1 copy of Taketomborg. The main reason I ran Battle Faders in the original build, my experience, opponents were setting Twin Twisters, which kind of screwed with setting back row. However, now, unless facing a Pendulum deck, I'm finding that opponents are less willing to set Twin Twister because there's so little chainable back row being run in the game, and somewhat almost out of a fear that their set Twin Twister is going to get itself Twin Twistered, especially early in the game. Thus, with this apparent change in play behavior, running some of the Mirror Force variants instead of Battle Fader seemed to be more appropriate. Thus, I run 2 copies of Quaking Mirror Force and 2 copies of Storming Mirror Force. For Quaking helps facilitate Queen removal by removing the advantage of cards like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, and Storming helps facilitate damage rushes. Finally, I run 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill to manage negators, especially those tree toads that will be hitting the meta in the near future, and other monsters that may interfere with Queen's effect. Breakthrough is especially useful for its self-banishing effect during the Madolche player's turn, so that the opponent has less ability to interfere with your plays later on down the line. I go back and forth on this final change, but currently I'm no longer running 1 Day of Peace, despite it having been useful in the past, and have replaced it with, interestingly enough, 1 Book of Moon, Book of Moon has entered the general state in the meta where it's typically no longer good enough as a simple opponent playstopper. It needs to offer some other benefit. The benefit in this deck is increasing the probability that Queen gets her effect off by using it on Queen to counter an opponent's counter, in addition to having the ability to limit the opponent's play. While I don't run it, another option is using Swords of Concealing Light, but I like Book of Moon in this deck more. One new possibility that I choose not to run but might interest others is a new stall card from Dark Illusions, Super Hippo Carnival. The chief advantage of Super Hippo is that it can fill your field with protective tokens, and it produces a free level 3 monster that can be used in XZ summoning to help support Queen via a Leviair or Invoker. The two main drawbacks to Super Hippo is that there are a couple of double piercers roaming the meta in Chaos Max Dragon and Metaphos or a Chalk, which can completely devastate the tokens as well as your life points. Second, and more importantly, Hippo tokens are still Hippo tokens in the capacity that they prevent extra deck summoning while they're on the field, which can really slow this deck down in a bad way. Overall, while Super Hippo can have its uses and summoning the tokens is optional, I prefer to keep it on the sidelines. Well, that is all the changes. Not surprisingly, there was only the one change to the Madolche specific monster lineup. Also, I keep the 2 copies of Creature Swap, which I still think is one of the most underrated cards in the game. Bounce with the Queen, then swap the monster you want, and your opponent's kind of up against it. It worked for me in the past, and it still works now. The Twin Twisters remain at 3 copies to eliminate back row threats against the Queen, as well as set up quick graveyard fodder for the Queen's effect. 2 Chateau remain despite some believing that 1 is the better choice. Those who run 1 typically do so only to use it for the big brilliant fusion combo, whereas this deck is more focused on tempo, and the second copy is actually meaningful. The extra deck is now as followed with few overall changes. 1 Madolche Puddingcess Chocolat-a-la-Mode, 2 Madolche Queen Tiaramisu, 1 Castel, 1 number S39 Utopia the Lightning, 1 number 39 Utopia, 1 Abyss Dweller, 1 Gagaga Cowboy, 1 number 47 Nightmare Shark, 1 Super Quantum Mecha Beast Granpulse, 1 Phantom Knight of Break Swords, or this can be a Mechquipped Angineer, 2 Leviair the Sea Dragon, 1 MX Saber Invoker, and 1 Totem Bird, which can be made the Terrortop Taketomborg combination. Overall, while at times the Queen will need some more backup from Creature Swaps, Twin Twisters, and Breakthrough skills due to more existing and prominent negation, Madolche are still a powerful deck that should be gearing up to win some top 16s or better in the future, not just at some regionals or maybe even at some YCSs. Well, that is my updated Madolche deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.